Welcome to part 8 of our series, Great Chapters from the Old Testament. If you've been joining us for our previous lessons, you realize by now the general import of our approach, a brief synopsis of each chapter. If you're new to our series, these are compilations of a previous collection of daily devotionals that combine the Old and the New Testament chapters. Every chapter is a great one because it is inspired by God to be recorded and preserved for us today. Still, in an effort to encourage people to read the Bible, I've endeavored to choose some of the most well-known chapters, read them, and in just a few words, add some devotional thoughts to that chapter. Combined, the reading and devotional thoughts are around 10 minutes, more or less. Certainly not sufficient for great orations or exhaustive studies of a chapter, but enough to give a brief overview of that chapter and perhaps pique one's interest for further study. In our last class, we looked at 4 chapters from the Old Testament. 2 Kings chapter 5, Naaman is healed of leprosy. 2 Kings chapter 22, the book of the law is found. 1 Chronicles chapter 17, the Lord's covenant with David. And 1 Chronicles 28, David's charge to Israel. This lesson, we'll look at 4 more great chapters. 2 Chronicles chapter 1, God gives Solomon wisdom. 2 Chronicles chapter 19, Jehoshaphat's reforms. 2 Chronicles chapter 36, Judah's decline and exile. And finally today, Ezra chapter 7, Ezra sets his heart. I hope you'll find these intriguing and thought-provoking, the greatest book ever compiled, the Holy Bible. And now, let's get started. Welcome back to another in our series of great chapters in the Bible. Our chapter today comes from the Old Testament book of 2 Chronicles. 2 Chronicles chapter 1, God gives Solomon wisdom. Solomon the son of David established himself in his kingdom, and the Lord his God was with him, and made him exceedingly great. Solomon spoke to all Israel, to the commanders of thousands and of hundreds, to the judges and to all the leaders in all Israel, the heads of fathers' houses. And Solomon and all the assembly with him went to the high place that was at Gibeon, for the tent of the meeting of God, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, had made in the wilderness, was there. But David had brought up the ark of God from Kiriath-Jearim to the place that David had prepared for it, for he had pitched a tent for it in Jerusalem. Moreover, the bronze altar that Bezalel, the son of Uri, son of Hur, had made was there before the tabernacle of the Lord. And Solomon and the assembly sought it out. And Solomon went up there to the bronze altar before the Lord, which was at the tent of the meeting, and offered 1,000 burnt offerings on it. In that night God appeared to Solomon, and said to him, Ask what I shall give you. And Solomon said to God, You have shown great and steadfast love to David my father, and have made me king in his place. O Lord God, let your word to David my father now be fulfilled. For you have made me king over a people as numerous as the dust of the earth. Give me now wisdom and knowledge to go out and come in before this people. For who can govern this people of yours, which is so great? God answered Solomon, Because this was in your heart, and you have not asked for possessions, wealth, honor, or the life of those who hate you, and have not even asked for long life, but have asked for wisdom and knowledge for yourself, that you may govern my people, over whom I have made you king. Wisdom and knowledge are granted to you. I will also give you riches, possessions, and honor, such as none of the kings who were before you, and none after you shall have the like. So Solomon came from the high place at Gibeon, from before the tent of meeting, to Jerusalem, and he reigned over Israel. Solomon gathered together chariots and horsemen. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, whom he stationed in chariot cities, and with the king in Jerusalem. And the king made silver and gold as common in Jerusalem as stone. And he made cedar as plentiful as the sycamore of the Shephelah. And Solomon's import of horses was from Egypt and Kue. And the king's traders would buy them from Kue for a price. They imported a chariot from Egypt for 600 shekels of silver, and a horse for 150. Likewise, through them, these were exported to all the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Syria. These days, the nature of some jobs is changing drastically. Some businesses are adding some pretty tempting benefits to draw workers. Some restaurants in the fast food industry are offering signing bonuses. Flexible hours is a big draw for some corporations. Working from home is becoming more commonplace. Some rather unusual perks to workers over the years have been rather attractive to prospective employees. On-site child care, paid leave for both parents, on-site workout classes, free passes to ski resorts, pet insurance, bring your dog to work, unlimited vacation times. Well, those are nice for employees, but how about CEO perks? Personal security detail to watch over you, car and drivers, corporate aircraft for business travel and personal travel, including family and friends, country club memberships. Oh, and don't forget the golden parachute package. As a CEO, if you lose your job, or the company is sold, or their jobs change for whatever reason, cash, stock options, bonuses, and more. And these are, in most cases, to the tune, on average, in the Fortune 500 countries, to $11.5 million in value. Now, we haven't even talked about presidents and members of Congress and the like. But a bowling alley in the White House, a personal chef, lifetime travel expenses, a personal trainer, a movie theater, all the ice cream you can eat as president. But you just can't beat the perks of a monarchy. Did you know the Queen of England owns all the fishes, all the whales, and all the dolphins around 3 miles extending out from the British Isles? She can drive without a license. She also doesn't need a passport to travel. She has 2 birthdays, one in June and one in April. She has her own personal poet and her own cash machine. But for all those perks and privileges and package deals, there's one king of which stands head and shoulders above all others for his reign. And that is King Solomon, heir to the throne of David, sovereign over Israel, leader of God's chosen people. Now that's what he inherited right off the bat, and those were guaranteed by God in a promise made to David. We read in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 12 through 13. When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. Of course, even David did not realize the messianic implications in that promise. Still, there was more that God had to offer than merely the throne, the rule, and reign over people. He makes that clear to Solomon in a dream in 2 Chronicles 1, verse 7. In that night, God appeared to Solomon and said to him, "Ask what I shall give you." It is clear that God is honor-bound to give him whatever he desires. Now, in the seasons of a man's life, it is clear he is affected by his age. A man, say in his early 20s, would certainly have different desires than that of, say, a man in his 50s. If we're inclined to take a guess at Solomon's age here, we would be fairly accurate to say he's most likely in his early to mid-20s. You can go back through Scripture and see for yourself. He's surely not a boy king of 8 or 10 years old, nor has he advanced in years. And we find that it is obvious that God is extremely pleased at Solomon's choice. He makes mention of what some might have asked. In verse 11, God answers Solomon, "Because this was in your heart, and you have not asked for possessions or wealth, honor, or the life of those who hate you, and have not even asked for long life, but have asked for wisdom and knowledge for yourself, that you may govern my people, over whom I have made you king." Yes, those things are what you would have expected to ask of one who is able to grant anything. But Solomon didn't. He asks for the greatest gift. Sure, as king, Solomon could take for himself anything he wanted for possession. He could exact taxes to accumulate wealth. He could bestow himself with honor, Surely, with his absolute power and loyalty of David's mighty men and army, he could exact revenge on those who hated him. And maybe long life could have been given by his virtue of simply being king. But wisdom and knowledge, they don't hand those out in a Cracker Jacks box. Those are earned with age and seldom found in abundance in the young. Solomon was so wise following this that he freely offered the keys to abundant living to all who would seek it. It's found in the book of Proverbs. Still, the real key to unlocking the door to wisdom's palace was exactly what Solomon displayed that night in Gibeon. For Solomon writes within Proverbs, in Proverbs chapter 9 and verses 10 and 11, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. For by me your days will be multiplied, and years will be added to your life." There it is. The fear of the Lord. There's much more to this fear than trembling flesh and knocking knees. James tells us that even the demons do that. It is the reverence for the Creator. It is the desire to do all for the glory of God. It is the knowledge that all is in His hands, the power of life and death. The desire to submit to the Almighty in everything in reverence is the beginning, the very starting point. Here's the best part. The very same thing that Solomon was offered is offered to us too. James tells us in James chapter 1 verses 5 through 6, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. But let him ask in faith, with no doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind." That's what the writer of the book of Hebrews tells us as well in Hebrews 11:6. "And without faith it is impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him." Given the choice of riches, possessions, and honor over and against wisdom and knowledge, why would you not choose wisdom? Here's what God's Word tells us about the rewards of wisdom. Solomon records in Proverbs 3, verses 13 through 17. "Blessed is the one who finds wisdom, and the one who gets understanding. For the gain from her is better than gain from silver, and her profit better than gold. She is more precious than jewels, and nothing you desire can compare to her. Long life is in her right hand. In her left hand are riches and honor. Her ways are ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace." So, what are we waiting for? Ask God for wisdom. And Lord willing, let's meet here again tomorrow and look at another of the great chapters in the Bible. Welcome back to another in our series of great chapters in the Bible. Our chapter today comes from the Old Testament book of 2 Chronicles. 2 Chronicles chapter 19, Jehoshaphat's reforms. Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, returned in safety to his house in Jerusalem. But Jehu, the son of Hanani, the seer, went out to meet him and said to King Jehoshaphat, "Should you help the wicked and love those who hate the Lord? Because of this, wrath has gone out against you from the Lord. Nevertheless, some good is found in you, for you destroyed the Ashereth out of the land and have set your heart to seek God." Jehoshaphat lived at Jerusalem, and he went out again among the people, from Beersheba to the hill country of Ephraim, and brought them back to the Lord, the God of their fathers. He appointed judges in the land in all the fortified cities of Judah, city by city, and said to the judges, "Consider what you do, for you judge not for man, but for the Lord. He is with you in giving judgment. Now then, Let the fear of the Lord be upon you. Be careful what you do, for there is no injustice with the Lord our God, or partiality, or taking bribes. Moreover, in Jerusalem, Jehoshaphat appointed certain Levites and priests and heads of families of Israel to give judgment for the Lord and to decide disputed cases. They had their seat at Jerusalem, and he charged them, "Thus you shall do in the fear of the Lord, in faithfulness, and with your whole heart. Whenever a case comes to you from your brothers who live in their cities concerning bloodshed, law or commandment, statutes or rules, then you shall warn them, that they may not incur guilt before the Lord, and wrath may not come upon you and your brothers. Thus you shall do, and you will not incur guilt. And behold, Amariah the chief priest is over you in all matters of the Lord, and Zebadiah the son of Ishmael, the governor of the house of Judah, in all the king's matters, and the Levites will serve you as officers. Deal courageously, and may the Lord be with the upright." Many years ago, I used to visit my neighbor, Frank. Frank was, as they say, a self-made man. He had an elementary school education, 6th grade as I remember, but he had a keen mind for figuring things out. He was part of the greatest generation we read about that came out of the Great Depression. He worked at a shipbuilding yard in Bay City, Michigan, and constructed ships for the U.S. Navy. Once these vessels were completed, one of the tests was to take them out into the bay and put them at full cruising speed, and then, at a moment's notice, put them in full reverse and be able to stop at a very short distance. The reason? If a torpedo was headed towards the ship, she needed to be able to avert disaster by stopping immediately and changing course. It put tremendous strain on that ship, but it needed that maneuverability in order to survive. There's an old saying about changing direction of one of those super tankers out on the ocean. It can be done, but it takes a lot of time and energy to point them in another direction. Not as much as you think. You just have to know where to apply the pressure. So it is with big tankers, big organizations, big companies, and big countries. It's hard to change their direction. You can apply a lot of effort, a bit less effort, or a minimal amount of effort. But knowing where to apply the pressure is key to change. Jehoshaphat is one of those kings of Judah who did good overall. There weren't many, so he stands out among them. Unlike the northern kingdom of Israel, where no king was known for being good, although they occasionally would do something good, Jehoshaphat's father Asa had this written about him in 1 Kings 15:11. "And Asa did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, as David his father had done." And this is written about Jehoshaphat in 1 Kings chapter 22, verses 42 through 43. Jehoshaphat was 35 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 25 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Azubah, the daughter of Shilai. He walked in all the way of Asa his father. He did not turn aside from it, doing what was right in the sight of the Lord. Yet the high places were not taken away, and the people still sacrificed and made offerings on the high places. We also read in 2 Chronicles of Jehoshaphat's reign, in 2 Chronicles 17, verses 3 through 6. The Lord was with Jehoshaphat because he walked in the earlier ways of his father David. He did not seek the Baals, but sought the God of his father, and walked in his commandments, and not according to the practices of Israel. Therefore, the Lord established the kingdom in his hand, and all Judah brought tribute to Jehoshaphat, and he had great riches and honor. His heart was courageous in the ways of the Lord, and furthermore, he took the high places and the Asherim out of Judah. Now, this might be confusing to hear that he had destroyed the high places of the Asherim, and yet the people still sacrificed and made offerings on the high places. Jehoshaphat destroyed the high places of the idols, but people still sacrificed to Jehovah in the high places rather than in Jerusalem only. But Jehoshaphat goes about rehabilitating Judah in a way that is rather unique. He educates them. It is one thing to destroy the idols and high places dedicated to them. But if you don't educate and teach people the right way, they will simply go back to their old ways. Knowledge is the key. The first thing listed in 2 Chronicles 19:4 is, he went out again among the people from Beersheba to the hill country of Ephraim and brought them back to the Lord, the God of their fathers. Here's where knowing your geography of the region comes in handy. Beersheba was all the way to the south. Remember when they would declare when something to be from top to bottom in Israel, they'd say from Dan, way up north, down to Beersheba, the extreme south. Jehoshaphat goes from Beersheba in the south to the northern hill country of Ephraim. These were the extremes of Judah, geographically speaking, the southern kingdom he reigned over. He personally goes out among the people. But wait, there's more. He appointed judges in verses 5 through 7 in all the fortified cities. In no uncertain terms, he bids them to be just, for they are representing God, not man. But wait, there's more yet. Levites, priests, and heads of families are appointed to decide disputes. Jehoshaphat borrows a page from the playbook of Moses, so to speak, who himself learned the hard way that it is better to delegate than to wear yourself out needlessly. We read in Exodus 18, verses 24 through 26. So Moses listened to the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he had said. Moses chose able men out of all Israel and made them heads over the people, chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. And they judged the people at all times. Any hard case they brought to Moses, but any small matter they decided themselves. Paul rightly speaks when he tells us in his letter to the Romans, in Romans 15:4, for whatever was written in former days was written for our instruction, that through the endurance and through the encouragement of the Scriptures we might have hope. And again in his letter to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians 10:11. Now these things happen to them as an example, but they are written down for our instruction, on whom the end of the ages has come. Yes, there is an abundance of wisdom there for the taking in the Old Testament. Jehoshaphat's methods sound a lot like what we read in the New Testament. Jesus himself taught this in Matthew 28:19 through 20. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you. And behold, I'm with you always to the end of the age. Paul taught this to Timothy in 2 Timothy 2:2. And what you've heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. Peter was earnest in his desire to pass on knowledge in 2 Peter 1:12 and 13. Therefore, I intend always to remind you of these qualities, though you know them and are established in the truth that you have. I think it right, as long as I am in this body, to stir you up by way of reminder. I read a chapter like this, and rather than rushing on to the next one, I take counsel in it and consider what the takeaways are here. First, change can come to a large group of people if you know where to apply the pressure. Second, go out among the people and meet them where they're at. Third, delegate, delegate, delegate. You can't do it all yourself. And fourth, remember, you're working for the Lord, not man. Now, what did you get from this chapter? And Lord willing, let's meet here again tomorrow and look at another of the great chapters in the Bible. Welcome back to another in our series of great chapters in the Bible. Our chapter today is found in the Old Testament book of 2 Chronicles. 2 Chronicles chapter 36, Judah's decline and exile. The people of the land took Jehoahaz, son of Josiah, and made him king in his father's place in Jerusalem. Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. Then the king of Egypt deposed him in Jerusalem, and laid on the land a tribute of 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. And the king of Egypt made Eliakim his brother king over Judah and Jerusalem, and changed his name to Jehoiakim. But Necho took Jehoahaz his brother and carried him to Egypt. Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord his God. Against him came up Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and bound him in chains to take him to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar also carried off the vessels of the house of the Lord to Babylon and put them in his palace in Babylon. Now the rest of the acts of Jehoiakim and the abominations that he did, and what was found against him, behold, they are written in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. And Jehoiachin his son reigned in his place. Jehoiachin was 18 years old when he became king, and he reigned 3 months and 10 days in Jerusalem. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. In the spring of the year, King Nebuchadnezzar sent and brought him to Babylon with the precious vessels of the house of the Lord, and made his brother Zedekiah king over Judah and Jerusalem. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord his God. He did not humble himself before Jeremiah the prophet, who spoke from the mouth of the Lord. He also rebelled against King Nebuchadnezzar, who had made him swear by God. He stiffened his neck and hardened his heart against turning to the Lord, the God of Israel. All the officers of the priests and the people likewise were exceedingly unfaithful, following all the abominations of the nations. And they polluted the house of the Lord that he had made holy in Jerusalem. The Lord, the God of their fathers, sent persistently to them by his messengers, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. But they kept mocking the messengers of God, despising his words and scoffing at his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord rose against his people, until there was no remedy. Therefore he brought up against them the king of the Chaldeans, who killed their young men with the sword in the house of their sanctuary, and had no compassion on young man or virgin, old man or aged. He gave them all into his hand, and all the vessels of the house of God, great and small, and the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king and his princes. All these he brought to Babylon. And they burned the house of God, and broke down the wall of Jerusalem, and burned all its palaces with fire, and destroyed all its precious vessels. He took into exile in Babylon those who had escaped from the sword, and they became servants to him and to his sons until the establishment of the kingdom of Persia, to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed its Sabbaths. All the days that it lay desolate, it kept Sabbath, to fulfill 70 years. Now, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and also put it in writing. Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, "The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever is among you of all his people, may the Lord his God be with him. Let him go up." There is a method that movie makers use at the end of the film that is quite effective. Rather than going on in a person's life or the situation, they simply put a short description of what happens to them subsequently in the credit rolls. You know the ones. He was killed by a drunk driver one night on his way home, or she never saw her parents again, or his appeal was denied and he spent the remainder of his life in prison. Those heartbreaking lines that you wish they hadn't put up on the screen so that you could have gone to bed at that night in peace. That's how I feel when I read this chapter. Just a punch in the gut that leaves you gasping for air. I wasn't even there, and I feel that way. Can you imagine what it was like for those who were exiled seeing their beloved Jerusalem? I get that sense when I read the 137th Psalm. "By the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and wept, when we remembered Zion. On the willows there we hung our lyres." And Jeremiah when he writes in Lamentations chapter 2 and verses 10 and 11. The elders of the daughter of Zion sit on the ground in silence. They have thrown dust on their heads and put on sackcloth. The young women of Jerusalem have bowed their heads to the ground. My eyes are spent with weeping. My stomach churns. My bile is poured out to the ground because of the destruction of the daughter of my people, because infants and babies faint in the streets of the city. But for all the weeping and sorrow they feel, it is not unwarranted what God allowed to happen, what God was honor-bound to do. It is rather like the weeping man, what he does. After being jailed, denied his license, fined and warned, he goes out again and while drunk behind the wheel, takes the life of another human being. Or the gambler who time and again has lost food money, car payments, paychecks, and now his house and family. Warned that this could and would eventually happen, nevertheless recklessly tosses it all away. Or the one who flirted one too many times with the one who was not his or her spouse and now sobs at the loss of a marriage. The occurrences are far too many, far too often, and far too tragic to not take seriously. But they continue on in reckless abandon. We might question God's actions at not stopping those marauding Chaldeans. How could he just stand by while the unbelievable carnage takes place? I can't imagine the heartbreak. But right there in the midst of this chapter lies the answer. Verses 15 and 16. The Lord, the God of their fathers, sent persistently to them by his messengers, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. But they kept mocking the messengers of God, despising his words and scoffing at his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord rose against his people, until there was no remedy. Persistently. I just had to look up that word in Hebrew. In the King James, it is rising up betimes and sending them. The New American Standard says, sent word to them again and again. The New King James Version says, rising up early and sending them. In Hebrew, it is the word shakam. It means to start early in the morning, like loading up a beast in the morning for a journey. Just imagine hundreds of years that God tolerated their disobedience. I suppose when we consider how a parent disciplines a child, how that could be taken into consideration here. A loving parent will, because of that love, want the best for a child. Therefore, they take the appropriate measures to ensure they learn. Sometimes only a stern look is required to bring that child in submission. Sometimes withdrawing privileges, sometimes a spanking is required. But in rare cases, a parent must allow that child to bring ruin upon themselves when all of their methods are exhausted. So it was with Judah, until there was no remedy. Listen to that sentence. Until there was no remedy. How many parents have you known who came to that point with their children? How many judges have thrown away the key after repeated attempts to reform behavior in criminals? God finally reaches that point. We may look around at the world we live in and shake our heads at how God has not returned in his wrath to recompense the wicked. Yet, that same patience he showed Israel and Judah is the same patience he showed in the days of Noah. The same patience he showed when a howling mob yelled, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" It's the same patience he shows today. And thank God he was and is patient with me. But one day, that patience will end in this world. I hope that remedy is at work with the gospel today. Don't you? And Lord willing, let's meet here again tomorrow and look at another of the great chapters in the Bible. Welcome back to another in our series of the great chapters in the Bible. Our chapter today comes from the Old Testament book of Ezra. Ezra chapter 7. Ezra sets his heart to study and teach. Now after this, in the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, Ezra, the son of Seraiah, the son of Azariah, the son of Hilkiah, son of Shallum, son of Zadok, son of Ahitub, son of Amariah, son of Azariah, son of Meraioth, son of Zeruiah, son of Uzai, son of Bukai, son of Abishai, son of Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the chief priest. This Ezra went up from Babylonia. He was a scribe skilled in the law of Moses that the Lord, the God of Israel, had given. And the king granted him all that he asked, for the hand of the Lord his God was on him. And there went up also to Jerusalem in the 7th year of Artaxerxes the king some of the people of Israel, and some of the priests and Levites, the singers and gatekeepers, and the temple servants. And Ezra came to Jerusalem in the 5th month, which was in the 7th year of the king. For on the 1st day of the 1st month he began to go up from Babylonia, and on the 1st day of the 5th month he came to Jerusalem, for the good hand of his God was on him. For Ezra had set his heart to study the law of the Lord, and to do it, and to teach his statutes and rules in Israel. This is a copy of the letter that King Artaxerxes gave to Ezra the priest, the scribe, a man learned in the matters of the commandments of the Lord and his statutes for Israel. Artaxerxes, king of kings, to Ezra the priest, the scribe of the law of the God of heaven. Peace. And now I make a decree that any one of the people of Israel, or their priests or Levites in my kingdom, who freely offers to go to Jerusalem, may go with you. For you are sent by the king and his 7 counselors to make inquiries about Judah and Jerusalem, according to the law of your God which is in your hand, and also to carry the silver and gold that the king and his counselors have freely offered to the God of Israel, whose dwelling is in Jerusalem, with all the silver and the gold that you shall find in the whole province of Babylonia, and with the freewill offerings of the people and the priests, vowed willingly for the house of their God that is in Jerusalem. With this money, then, you shall with all diligence buy bulls, rams, and lambs with their grain offerings and their drink offerings, and you shall offer them on the altar of the house of your God that is in Jerusalem. Whatever seems good to you and your brothers to do with the rest of the silver and gold, you may do, according to the will of your God. The vessels that have been given for you, the service of the house of your God, you shall deliver before the God of Jerusalem. And whatever else is required for the house of your God, which it falls to you to provide, you may provide it out of the king's treasury. And I, Artaxerxes the king, make a decree to all the treasures in the province beyond the river. Whatever Ezra the priest, the scribe of the law of the God of heaven, requires of you, let it be done with all diligence, up to 100 talents of silver, 100 cores of wheat, 100 baths of wine, 100 baths of oil, and salt, without prescribing how much. Whatever is decreed by the God of heaven, let it be done in full for the house of the God of heaven, lest his wrath be against the realm of the king and his sons. We also notify you that it shall not be lawful to impose tribute, custom, or toll on any one of the priests, the Levites, the singers, the doorkeepers, the temple servants, or other servants of this house of God. And you, Ezra, according to the wisdom of your God that is in your hand, appoint magistrates and judges who may judge all the people in the province beyond the river, all such as know the laws of your God, and those who do not know them you shall teach. Whoever will not obey the law of your God and the law of the king, let judgment be strictly executed on him, whether for death or for banishment, or for confiscation of his goods, or for imprisonment. Blessed be the Lord, the God of our fathers, who put such a thing as this into the heart of the king, to beautify the house of the Lord that is in Jerusalem, and who extended to me his steadfast love before the king and his counselors, and before all the king's mighty officers. I take courage, for the hand of the Lord my God was on me, and I gathered leading men from Israel to go up with me. If you think education is expensive, try ignorance. I saw that on a bumper sticker many years ago, and I've never forgotten it. I'll spend the next several minutes trying to convince you of the benefits of learning. But in the end, I will admit that this bumper sticker said it all. That's not going to stop me from trying. Nations, states, districts, cities, towns, and the tiniest of classrooms all fundamentally believe the same thing. Education is a good thing. It is like the rudder that steers the giant ships. Such a small thing, but it guides the vessels nonetheless. Now, how to accomplish that task, that's another story. But the education of the masses rests in the hands of a few individuals, for better or for worse. What we really hope is that it is the better, for the future depends on this. The results won't be seen immediately, but over time the merits of that teaching will reap what's sown. Ezra, the son of Seraiah. Now let me stop right here and alert you to the importance of the first 5 verses of this chapter. Do not skip over these verses. Doesn't that sound a lot like some of the teachers you and I have had? Those who know me know that I am rather fond of pointing out the genealogies in the Bible as they occur. Yes, I tend to harp on these rather a lot. But the Holy Spirit has inspired these writers to record these names. And like a good teacher of history, a timeline is established. There are 16 generations recorded that reach back 1,000 years to Aaron, the first high priest of the nation of Israel, recorded in the book of Exodus. Now, understand that there are more than 16 generations in this list. But in the realm of Hebrew history, to say that you are a son of someone may in actuality mean that that man is your grandfather or great-grandfather and so on. Much in the same way that someone might say they are sons of Abraham, even though they are separated by many generations and not a little time. Are you beginning to yawn yet? Have I lost you? Have you already turned the page or skipped this video altogether? Well, that's unfortunate, but it is to be expected. You see, it has always been that way. Remember when you were young and all you wanted to do was play? Well, while you and I were out playing, people like our doctors, our professors, our presidents, and professionals we count on to perform so many of our daily functions for us, they were inside studying. All that work they put into reading, studying, discovering paid off in their accomplishments. Now, that's not to say we didn't put in our time, but we didn't have the drive many of those listed had. But that's okay. Not everyone is a Rhodes Scholar. I wonder what little Ezra's friends were doing all the while that he was unrolling and re-rolling scrolls of the books of the law. All those countless hours when he sat at the feet of the rabbis listening intently. Maybe they were playing. Maybe they were slaves to their Persian masters. Yes, those whose hearts they were preparing for a life of work, play, servitude, or some other avocation were unaware that their friend, their neighbor, their fellow Jew in exile was to become one of the greatest scribes in the history of their nation, in the history of the world. Now we're told in Ezra chapter 7, verse 6, this Ezra went up from Babylonia. He was a scribe skilled in the law of Moses that the Lord, the God of Israel, had given. And the king granted him all that he asked, for the hand of the Lord his God was on him. Do not pass over this saying, for the hand of the Lord was on him. This phrase, the hand of the Lord or the hand of God and so forth, is found several times in this book. In chapter 7 alone, it's found in verse 6, verse 9, verse 28. And in chapter 8, it's found in verse 18, verse 22, and verse 31. But it is also found elsewhere in the Old Testament. In 1 Kings chapter 18 and verse 46, and the hand of the Lord was on Elijah. And he gathered up his garment and ran before Ahab to the entrance of Jezreel. And we find it again in 2 Kings chapter 3 and verse 15. But now bring me a musician. And when the musician played, the hand of the Lord came upon him. And yet again in the book of Ezekiel, Ezekiel 1:3, the word of the Lord came to Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the Chebar Canal, and the hand of the Lord was upon him. Ezekiel uses this expression several times in the book, chapter 3 and verse 14, and again in verse 22 of that chapter, chapter 8, verse 1, chapter 33, verse 22, chapter 37, verse 1, and chapter 40, verse 1. Now, how many have I lost in this short devotional now? Well, now I come to one of perhaps my favorite verses in the entirety of the Bible. It's taken me 50 days of devotionals of the great chapters in the Bible to get to it, but I finally made it. Ezra 7:10. For Ezra had set his heart to study the law of the Lord, and to do it, and to teach his statutes and rules in Israel. Hundreds, and I mean hundreds of times, I have read this passage, literally. But what did Ezra have that I don't have? What did Ezra have that we all lacked? Listen closely, for I'm only going to say this several times. He doesn't have anything that you and I couldn't have if we only had the desire. That's all he did. That's all he did. All he did was set his heart to study. Now, isn't that easy? Well, for just 10 minutes a day, you could be like Ezra. Don't fool yourself. 10 minutes a day is precisely why we will never be like Ezra. No, this is not a hobby. It's a lifestyle. This is a vocation, not an avocation. This is a burning desire in the heart, not a fad du jour. This is all-consuming. It's more than a hearty amen to a bumper sticker that says, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. It is rolling up your sleeves and getting to work. Do you think James says in his letter in the New Testament in James chapter 4 and verse 8, draw near to God and he will draw near to you? What are the implications of this? Would you like to know what it feels like to draw near to God and have him draw near to you? Wouldn't you like to know what the hand of God feels like upon you? It can't happen by giving your spare time to God. Think about what Paul told Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 15. Be diligent to present yourself approved to God, a worker who does not need to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. Well, which did you find was easier to digest? The bumper sticker or my rambling? And Lord willing, let's meet here again tomorrow and look at another of the great chapters in the Bible. And there you have it, another installment in our series on the great chapters of the Old Testament. I hope you've been edified and inspired to dive deeper into a study of this greatest of all books, the Bible. And I'll hope you join us again as we shall look into more of great chapters from the Old Testament. And may God richly bless you in your search for truth. Lord willing, we'll see you again.